Imagine a world without books, without paper, without any of the physical anchors we associate with knowledge. No libraries filled with bound volumes, no archives stacked with scrolls. Yet somehow, across vast deserts and over mountain ranges, through generations and across languages, wisdom continued to travel. How was this possible? How did entire civilizations preserve their histories, their sciences, their stories, without relying on the written page? This question lies at the heart of one of history's most fascinating and overlooked achievements, the intellectual legacy of nomadic societies. We often picture nomads as constantly moving, living lightly on the land. But what we miss is the incredible sophistication of their methods for safeguarding knowledge. From the Mongols on the Central Asian steppes to the Bedouins in the Arabian deserts and the Tuareg in the Sahara, these cultures developed systems that were both ingenious and resilient. They built libraries not of paper but of memory. They stored wisdom not on shelves but in songs, in artifacts, in the very landscape around them. They created hidden repositories, underground caches, secluded caves, and guarded oral traditions that allowed their knowledge to survive invasions, environmental shifts, and the passage of time itself. This is a story about the universal human thirst to learn, to share, and to remember. It's about how innovation flourishes under constraint and how some of the most enduring systems of knowledge were designed to be portable, secret, and deeply woven into the fabric of community life. As we embark on this journey together, we'll uncover how these ancient practices not only shape the past but also echo strikingly in our modern digital world. By the end, you'll see that the desire to preserve and transmit knowledge is a thread that connects us all across time, across cultures, and across the seemingly silent landscapes of history. So let's begin. When we think of the great libraries of the ancient world, our minds often travel to the fixed, magnificent structures of Alexandria or Baghdad. But what about the civilizations that built no buildings at all? To understand the incredible story of how knowledge traveled without paper, we must first reimagine the very people at its heart. The term nomad often conjures images of simple wanderers drifting without purpose, but this couldn't be further from the truth. These were highly organized, deeply intellectual cultures whose survival depended not just on moving their herds, but on moving their minds. Across the vast, windswept steppes of Central Asia, the Mongols forged history's largest contiguous land empire. In the expansive, sun-scorched deserts of North Africa, the Berber tribes, including the Tuareg, mastered the art of Saharan travel and trade. Roaming the open grasslands north of the Black Sea, the Scythians became renowned for their intricate gold work and equestrian skills. While each of these groups was distinct, they shared a common thread, a lifestyle defined by mobility. This wasn't a choice made from aimlessness. It was a sophisticated adaptation to some of the planet's most challenging environments. They moved with the seasons, following scarce resources, and in doing so, they developed a unique relationship with knowledge itself. Unlike their sedentary neighbors who could store information in heavy, immovable clay tablets or parchment scrolls within fortified cities, nomads had to carry everything they owned, including their intellectual wealth. This fundamental constraint sparked incredible innovation. Their libraries couldn't be made of stone. They had to be built from memory, woven into textiles, etched onto portable objects, and hidden within the very landscape they traversed. Knowledge became lightweight, durable, and deeply integrated into the rituals of daily life. A complex legal code might be remembered through a series of proverbs recited by elders around a fire. A precise location of a vital water source could be encoded in a song passed from parent to child. A family's entire genealogy might be stored in the patterns of a handmade rug. This system of carrying knowledge required a highly specialized and respected class of keepers. These weren't librarians in the traditional sense, but storytellers, shamans, blacksmiths, and elders. Within Mongol society, the bara, or shamans, were living repositories of spiritual and medicinal knowledge. Among the Tuareg, certain women were the guardians of their unique Tifinagh script and the poetry written in it. For the Scythians, master goldsmiths encoded their myths and history in the artifacts they crafted. These keepers underwent rigorous training, often from childhood, to memorize vast amounts of information with flawless accuracy. Their role was sacred, ensuring that the collective wisdom of their people, the stories that defined them, the skills that sustained them, and the histories that guided them, would not be lost to the wind. They were the pillars of a civilization in constant motion, the human embodiment of a library that never closed its doors. So what exactly did these nomadic libraries look like if they weren't grand buildings filled with books? The answer forces us to expand our definition of a library itself. For these cultures on the move, a library wasn't a place you visited, it was a system you protected. It was a living, breathing network of preservation that took on many astonishing forms, all designed to outlast the harshest of conditions. Imagine not a quiet reading room, but a deep, dry cave hidden within a Saharan mountain range, its walls cool to the touch, sheltering clay pots filled with tightly rolled leather scrolls. Picture a sealed chest crafted from treated animal hide and waterproofed with resins, buried beneath a specific, unmarked tree in the vast Mongolian steppe, known only to a chosen few. Or consider the most portable library of all, the meticulously trained mind of a tribal elder, a walking memory palace holding centuries of lore, poetry, and star lore within the folds of their consciousness. These spaces were far more than simple storage. They were actively curated archives. Knowledge wasn't just dumped and forgotten. It was carefully selected, organized, and maintained. A shaman might be responsible for the spiritual texts, ensuring the rituals and medicinal recipes were copied onto new materials as the old ones decayed. An elder might be the keeper of genealogical records, mentally updating the family lineages with each new birth and marriage. This curation meant the library was a dynamic entity, evolving with the people it served, yet always with the core intention of safeguarding the most vital information from any threat, be it a marauding army, a devastating sandstorm, or simply the relentless erosion of time. We see this vividly with the Tuareg people, often called the Blue People of the Sahara. Their desert homeland offered a natural ally in preservation, the extreme dry heat. They utilized secluded oases, not just for water, but as secure nodes in their knowledge network. In hidden caves near these life-giving springs, they would stash libraries consisting of wooden boards inscribed with their Tifinagh script, leather scrolls detailing trading routes and agreements, and bags containing sacred amulets, each object a piece of a larger intellectual puzzle. Similarly, Mongol tribes traversing the open grasslands would use the landscape itself as a cataloging system. A remote mountain pass, a distinctive rock formation, or the base of an ancient tree could serve as a hiding spot for a buckchuck, a container holding everything from imperial decrees on birch bark to diagrams of celestial movements used for navigation. The location itself was a secret passed down through generations, turning the entire territory into a vast, hidden card catalog. This approach functioned as a cultural fortress. In the event of a community being scattered by conflict or disaster, these hidden caches ensured that their core identity, their laws, their history, their stories would remain intact. Even if the people were separated, the knowledge endured, waiting in the earth to be recovered and reunited with them. It was a brilliant strategy of decentralization long before the concept had a name. This innovative, multifaceted understanding of what a library can be profoundly challenges our modern, often paper-centric, definitions of literacy and knowledge preservation. It proves that the container is less important than the content, and the greatest library is one that can survive its own civilization's collapse. But how could a society entrust its entire cultural memory to something as seemingly fragile as human speech? The answer lies in one of humanity's most remarkable and disciplined intellectual traditions. In a world without the written word, the human voice and memory did not become weaker. They were forged into instruments of incredible precision and durability. Oral tradition was far more than just telling stories around a campfire. It was a highly sophisticated, multi-layered system of preservation, a living, breathing library where designated individuals became the shelves, the books, and the librarians all at once. These living libraries held entire worlds within their minds. In West Africa, the Greit caste, known as Jeliw, were more than musicians. They were revered historians, genealogists, and advisors. A single Greit could recite the history of a kingdom and the lineage of its rulers stretching back centuries, a vital resource for maintaining social order and legitimacy. On the Mongolian steppes, a bard would perform the epic of King Jesar, a poem so vast it could take weeks to recite in its entirety, preserving myths, moral codes, and historical events in its rhythmic verses. Among the Bedouin tribes of Arabia, poetry was the primary medium for recording everything from complex family trees and legal disputes to meticulous observations of the stars, which were essential for navigation across the featureless desert. Each line of a poem, each rhythm of a song was a carefully crafted data point in a massive mental archive. This level of memorization was not left to chance. It was the product of a lifelong and grueling apprenticeship that often began in early childhood. Elders would teach the next generation through a system of call and response, using powerful mnemonic devices to lock information into place. Knowledge was frequently embedded within complex poetic meters or set to specific melodies, as the rhythm and rhyme themselves acted as cognitive hooks, making the information easier to recall and harder to distort. The physical act of performance was also crucial. Recitations were often ritualized events, accompanied by music, dance, or the repetitive handling of a sacred object. These elements created a multi-sensory experience that further cemented the knowledge in both the speaker's and the listener's minds, transforming a simple transfer of information into a profound cultural ceremony. This system's greatest strength was its beautiful paradox. It was both incredibly stable and remarkably adaptable. The core narrative, the essential law, or the critical star chart had to remain unchanged, its truth preserved across generations. Yet, a skilled storyteller could also subtly adapt a tale to address current events, to teach a new lesson, or to incorporate a recently encountered idea from a trade partner. This allowed nomadic knowledge to stay relevant and responsive to a changing world without losing its foundational principles. It proves that true literacy is not merely the ability to read and write text. It is the ability to faithfully transmit understanding, to keep a culture's flame alive through the power of voice, memory, and shared experience. This vibrant, auditory world of knowledge was perfectly complemented by a silent, yet equally eloquent language of objects. While the human voice was a powerful and living library, nomadic cultures understood that some forms of knowledge required a more permanent, tangible anchor. They turned to the physical world around them, transforming everyday items and sacred objects into encoded vessels of wisdom. A simple tool, a piece of jewelry, or a ceremonial item was never just an object. It was a book waiting to be read by those who knew its language. This practice of embedding information into material culture created a durable, portable, and incredibly resilient backup system for their most vital knowledge. Consider the daily life of a Kazakh herder on the vast, open steppe. His most constant companion was his staff, a long wooden rod used for guiding sheep. But upon closer inspection, that staff was far more than a walking aid. Carved meticulously along its length might be a series of notches and symbols representing specific constellations: the North Star, the Big Dipper, the Summer Triangle. This was not idle decoration, it was a functional celestial map. On a cloudless night, far from any landmarks, the herder could feel the familiar carvings under his thumb and use them to recall the precise positions of stars needed to navigate to the next seasonal pasture. The staff was both a practical tool and a portable astronomy text, its knowledge literally at his fingertips. This blending of utility and meaning extended to personal adornment as well. Among the Berber and Tuareg peoples of North Africa, the intricate designs on a woman's silver necklace or a man's engraved amulet often held layers of symbolic significance. A particular geometric pattern might represent a specific clan's history. A series of symbols could encode a protective prayer or a fragment of tribal lore, and the arrangement of stones might denote a family's status or lineage. Wearing this knowledge was a way of keeping it safe, close to the body, and in constant circulation within the community. It was also a form of discreet communication, allowing members of the same culture to recognize and understand each other through these silent, symbolic declarations. The most spectacular examples of this object-based knowledge come from the Scythians, the formidable nomadic horsemen of the Eurasian steppes. They left behind stunning gold plaques, belts, and weapon fittings, often recovered from their burial mounds known as kurgans. To an untrained eye, these are merely beautiful works of art depicting animals in combat. But to a Scythian, these scenes were a complex visual language. A struggling panther locked in battle with a griffin might narrate a specific myth about the creation of the world. A procession of stags could tell the story of a successful migration or a military campaign. These golden artifacts were their history books and their religious texts, pressed into metal and intended to be buried with their owners, safeguarding the stories for the afterlife and, inadvertently, for future archaeologists to discover. These objects, whether humble or lavish, were frequently integrated into the very concept of the underground library. A Berber family might seal a chest containing not only leather scrolls, but also the ceremonial jewelry of their ancestors, burying it in a known location near a sacred well. A Scythian shaman's toolkit of ritual cups and adorned knives might be hidden in a remote cave, forming a physical archive of spiritual practice. By turning knowledge into artifacts, nomads made it resilient. A scroll could decay, a song could be forgotten, but a finely crafted gold plaque or a deeply carved staff could endure for centuries, silently holding its stories until someone from the same culture or a curious future learned how to read its unique and powerful language. But memorizing epics and encoding maps onto staffs was only half the battle. The true test was ensuring that this precious, hard-won knowledge could physically withstand the relentless assault of the elements. Imagine the constant, grinding threat of a Saharan sandstorm capable of scouring the paint from a car, let alone the delicate ink on a leather scroll. Or consider the damp, mold-promoting humidity of a Central Asian spring, threatening to turn a bundle of birch bark into an illegible pulp. Nomadic societies didn't just hope their knowledge would survive, they engineered its survival with a sophisticated understanding of their environment and the materials within it. Their first line of defense was a mastery of natural preservatives, For written materials, this meant carefully treating the very surfaces they wrote on. The Tuareg, for instance, would often prepare their animal hide scrolls by rubbing them with a mixture of oils and tree resins. This process did more than just make the leather supple. It created a hydrophobic barrier, causing moisture to bead up and roll off rather than being absorbed. In some cases, they even used smoke to cure the hides, a method that infused them with tannins and other compounds that repelled insects and slowed decay. Similarly, cultures that used pottery or clay jars to store their artifacts would seal the lids with beeswax or bitumen, creating an airtight environment that could protect the contents from both moisture and oxygen for decades, if not centuries. This wasn't rudimentary guesswork, it was applied chemistry born from generations of observation and experimentation. The second, and perhaps even more brilliant strategy, was the strategic selection of hiding places. Nomads possessed an intimate, almost familial knowledge of their territory. They knew which south-facing cliff had a perfectly dry crevice, sheltered from the rain and snow. They identified caves deep enough to maintain a stable, cool temperature year-round, acting as natural climate-controlled vaults. The Mongols took this to its logical extreme in the permafrost regions of Siberia and northern Mongolia. Understanding that cold was a powerful agent of preservation, a fact we now leverage with modern freezers, they would bury important containers in these permanently frozen grounds. They used durable materials like metal or thick leather for the containers themselves, knowing the cold would arrest the growth of mold and bacteria, effectively placing the documents inside in a state of suspended animation. An imperial decree or a detailed star chart could be buried for 100 years and emerge nearly as legible as the day it was interred, perfectly protected by the very earth that seemed so harsh. Perhaps the most resilient technique of all, however, was the principle of distribution. These societies understood that putting all your eggs or all your scrolls in one basket was a catastrophic risk. So they created redundant systems. A single epic poem wasn't entrusted to just one bard, it was known by several across different clans. A vital medicinal recipe wasn't the sole property of a single shaman. It was shared among a trusted circle of apprentices. If a hidden cave library was discovered by looters or destroyed by a rockslide, the knowledge wasn't lost forever because copies of it existed elsewhere, either in other physical caches or, most importantly, in the minds of other people. This decentralized network was their ultimate insurance policy. It meant their cultural memory had no single point of failure. This community-wide approach to risk management reveals a profound collective intelligence, showcasing that for nomads, preserving knowledge was never an individual pursuit. It was a sacred duty shared by all, a distributed ledger of wisdom long before the concept ever entered the digital age. This careful guarding of knowledge raises a profound question. If wisdom was so tightly held within closed circles, how did it ever travel or grow? The answer lies in a beautiful and seemingly contradictory reality. While internally, knowledge was a protected treasure, externally, it became a form of currency. The very same trade routes that carried silk, spices, and salt also functioned as invisible highways for the most precious cargo of all, information. Nomadic societies were not isolated islands. They were the vital links in the chains of commerce that connected entire continents, and along these bustling routes, their guarded secrets found ways to mingle and multiply. Picture the scene at a bustling caravanserai, a fortified inn along the Silk Road. As the sun sets over the desert, merchants from China, Persia, and Byzantium water their camels alongside Tuareg guides and Mongol horsemen. The air is thick with the sounds of barter in a dozen languages, but once the business of goods is done, another kind of exchange begins around the cooking fires. A Tibetan trader might share a new method for treating altitude sickness, learned from a monk in a high mountain pass. A Bedouin navigator, in return, might describe a newly discovered constellation pattern that predicts a rare desert rain. A Mongol warrior, impressed by the metalwork of a blade from Damascus, might engage the blacksmith in a conversation about forging techniques. In these informal, cross-cultural conversations, knowledge was not stolen. It was gifted, traded, and mutually enriched. The strategic information so carefully protected within each culture began to cross-pollinate at these grand intersections of humanity. This exchange was often facilitated by the very specialists entrusted with keeping secrets. Shamans and healers were particularly keen to learn about new medicinal plants and remedies encountered on distant trade routes. A Tuareg medicine woman might acquire a new recipe for a poultice from a Saharan trader who obtained it from a community deep in West Africa. She wouldn't simply adopt it, she would adapt it, testing it against her existing knowledge and perhaps even improving it with a local herb known only to her people. This newly synthesized knowledge would then be incorporated into her guarded repertoire, to be passed down to her own apprentice under vows of secrecy. In this way, the exclusive knowledge systems of nomads were not static vaults. They were living, breathing entities that could absorb, refine, and innovate based on the intelligence gathered from the world's greatest trading network. The flow was bidirectional too. The famed Yam System of the Mongol Empire, a courier network of relay stations that stretched for thousands of miles, was designed for military and administrative messages. But it inevitably also carried scientific observations, weather reports, and medical advice between the far-flung corners of the empire, effectively creating a medieval internet for privileged information. This complex dance of fiercely protecting knowledge internally while selectively engaging with it externally showcases a sophisticated understanding of information as both a sacred heirloom and a dynamic, evolving resource. Yet for all their secrecy and protection, these nomadic societies were far from isolated. They were, in fact, the very lifeblood of the ancient world's greatest information superhighways. Picture the Silk Road not just as a single dusty path, but as a sprawling, pulsating network of routes connecting the Mediterranean to the Pacific. This was not merely a conduit for silk and spices. It was a vibrant, living artery for the exchange of ideas, where knowledge itself became one of the most valuable and sought-after commodities. Caravans did not travel empty of intellect. Alongside bales of cloth and sacks of precious gems, they carried maps etched onto lambskin, astronomical charts memorized by astute navigators, and medicinal recipes whispered between healers at crowded way stations. A Persian merchant might share a new algebraic concept picked up in Baghdad with a Mongol trader, who would then carry it eastward, adapting its principles to better calculate distances across the endless steppe. This constant, fluid exchange transformed these trade routes into a kind of slow-motion internet, where data packets of wisdom were passed from hand to hand, mind to mind across continents and cultures. The Mongol Empire, often depicted solely as a machine of conquest, masterfully engineered this flow of information. Their legendary Yam System, a courier network of relay stations spaced a day's ride apart, was the logistical marvel of its age. While its primary purpose was to speed official decrees and military intelligence across vast distances, it inadvertently became the backbone for a rapid transmission of knowledge. A physician's breakthrough in treating a fever, observed at one end of the empire, could be carried by a mounted messenger to another region within weeks, potentially saving countless lives. Observations of a comet or an unusual weather pattern, meticulously recorded by a shaman in the Altai Mountains, could find its way to an astronomer in Karakoram. This system ensured that practical, life-saving, and intellectually stimulating information could circulate with a speed and reliability that was unimaginable to most settled societies of the time, who were often constrained by slower, more bureaucratic channels of communication. This created a fascinating two-way street of intellectual influence. We often think of nomads as absorbers of settled civilizations' wisdom, but the flow was profoundly bidirectional. A Chinese innovation in papermaking might travel west, but it would be adapted by nomadic cultures into more durable, portable formats like treated leather scrolls. Conversely, the nomadic expertise in animal husbandry and veterinary medicine, absolutely essential for surviving on the steppe, was eagerly sought by settled agricultural societies to improve their own livestock. A Persian scholar might record a complex oral history from a Scythian storyteller, preserving it in a written text that would then be stored in a great city library. In this way, the hidden, secretive knowledge guarded so closely by nomadic elders and shamans didn't just remain hidden. It seeped into the broader intellectual consciousness of the world, filtered through the lens of trade and cultural contact. The nomads were not passive recipients at the edges of civilization. They were active, crucial participants at the very center of a global conversation, simultaneously preserving their own ancient traditions while simultaneously curating and distributing new ideas across the known world. This intricate web of exchange, built on trust and mutual interest, perfectly sets the stage for looking at the specific, tangible libraries where this knowledge was originally stored. To truly grasp the scale of this nomadic ingenuity, we need only look to the most formidable example in history, the Mongol Empire. Under the visionary leadership of Genghis Khan and his successors, this vast domain stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe, and governing such an immense territory required more than just military might. It demanded an unprecedented system for managing information. The Mongols engineered a knowledge network that was as decentralized and resilient as their society itself, a stark contrast to the singular, vulnerable libraries of the settled world. Theirs was not a library of Alexandria, a single beacon of learning that could be extinguished in one catastrophic fire. Instead, they built a distributed archive, a web of hidden caches that stretched across thousands of miles, ensuring that even if one part of the empire was lost, its intellectual heart would continue beating elsewhere. The contents of these secret archives were as diverse as the empire itself. Imperial scribes known as Chigchis would inscribe the Great Khan's decrees or jarlegs onto durable, lightweight materials perfect for a life on the move. Birch bark, plentiful in the northern forests, was a common medium, its smooth surface ideal for taking ink. For the most important documents, like diplomatic correspondence or sacred texts, they used strips of silk, a material that was strong, did not tear easily, and could be rolled tightly for discreet transport and storage. These weren't just administrative records. These hidden troves contained detailed military tactics, meticulous maps of caravan routes and mountain passes, astronomical charts used for navigation and ritual timing, and genealogical records that solidified the lineage and legitimacy of the ruling family. This was the operational knowledge of a superpower, and it was treated with the utmost secrecy and security. The guardians of this knowledge were not faceless bureaucrats but trusted members of specific clans whose loyalty to the Khan was absolute. These families were entrusted with the locations of the hidden repositories, often situated in impossibly remote areas known only to them. A cave system in the Altai Mountains, a sealed tomb in the Gobi Desert, a crevice behind a waterfall in the Kentai Range, these became the filing cabinets of an empire. The knowledge itself was often duplicated and dispersed, a practice of deliberate redundancy that meant a complete copy of the empire's most vital laws and strategies might exist in 3 or 4 different locations simultaneously. This system ensured that no single enemy raid or natural disaster could ever erase the collective wisdom and will of the Mongol leadership. The fall of the empire, however, led to one of history's great mysteries. As the unified Khanate fractured, many of these clans retreated, taking their sacred trust with them. Fearing that their knowledge could be desecrated or used by enemies, they often chose to conceal the caches even more deeply, or in some cases, to take the secret of their locations to their graves. For centuries, these archives vanished into legend, becoming the stuff of whispered stories and archaeological dreams. It is only in more recent times, through the painstaking work of modern archaeologists, that we have begun to rediscover fragments of this lost system. A sealed pottery jar unearthed in permafrost, preserving a 700-year-old decree. A leather-wrapped bundle found in a high mountain cave containing star charts on silk. Each discovery is a tantalizing piece of the puzzle, revealing the breathtaking sophistication with which the world's greatest nomadic empire organized, protected, and transmitted its knowledge, using the vastness of the landscape itself as its ultimate safeguard. While the Mongols mastered the preservation of imperial knowledge across the frozen steppes, another nomadic culture was perfecting a different kind of library in the world's most unforgiving heat. The Tuareg people, often called the Blue People for the indigo dye of their distinctive robes, have navigated the vast emptiness of the Sahara for millennia. Their survival depended on an intimate knowledge of the desert's secrets, the location of hidden wells, the meaning of shifting dunes, the patterns of stars that guide a caravan through a sea of sand. And to safeguard this life-saving wisdom, they developed a remarkable system of desert libraries, not of paper, but of leather, rock, and memory, centered around a unique and ancient script known as Tifinog. Unlike the purely oral traditions of some cultures, the Tuareg possessed a written script, a fact that often surprises those who stereotype nomadic life as simple or illiterate. Tifinog is an elegant and geometric script, its characters seeming to echo the sharp angles of desert mountains and the curves of winding dunes. They used this script to inscribe their world, etching vital information directly onto the landscape itself. A flat rock near a rare water source might be carved with symbols and directions to the next oasis, a permanent signpost for those who could read it. But their most precious texts were reserved for more portable and protected formats. Scribes, using inks made from natural pigments, would carefully copy poetry, complex legal codes governing water rights and tribal relations, and precise astronomical charts onto treated gazelle or goat skin. These leather scrolls were lightweight, durable, and could be rolled tightly and carried in a protective tube, making them perfect for a life of constant movement. The guardians of this written tradition were, and in many ways still are, Tuareg women. In a fascinating reversal of common historical narratives, literacy was traditionally considered the domain of women, passed down from mother to daughter. A young girl would learn to read and write Tifinog from her mother, often using a wooden slate to practice the characters. This matrilineal knowledge system made women the chief librarians and intellectuals of their society. They were the keepers of the family's most valuable scrolls, the composers of intricate poetry that explored themes of love, loss, and desert life, and the transcribers of the oral histories told by male elders. This responsibility granted Tuareg women a significant degree of social prestige and autonomy, as they controlled access to the very information that defined their culture's identity and ensured its survival. The true test of this system's resilience came with the arrival of French colonial forces in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. recognizing that their written heritage was a direct threat to colonial control, a tangible proof of a sophisticated culture that defied notions of European superiority. The Tuareg made a courageous decision. To protect their autonomy and the very soul of their people, they deliberately hid their libraries. Precious family collections of scrolls were sealed in waterproof leather bags or placed inside clay pots. These were then buried in the dry sand beneath their tents, hidden in deep crevices within remote mountain massifs like the Hoggar and the Aya, or secreted away in caves known only to a trusted few near isolated oases. This act of cultural preservation turned the entire Sahara into a vast, clandestine archive, a library with no walls and no central catalogue, its contents known only to those who had earned the trust of its guardians. Today, a new chapter is being written for these hidden libraries. Anthropologists and linguists, often working in close partnership with Tuareg communities, are engaged in a race against time to locate, preserve, and digitize these fragile texts. Elderly women are sharing the locations of family caches, and the scrolls within, once threatened by modern humidity and the gradual fading of memory, are being carefully photographed and their Tifinagh inscriptions transcribed. This process is revealing an intellectual heritage of astounding depth, epic poems that rival the Odyssey in their scope, legal texts that reveal a complex and nuanced system of justice, and astronomical records that demonstrate a precise understanding of the celestial bodies that guided them. This work does more than just save ancient documents. It actively challenges the outdated and prejudiced view of nomadism as a primitive struggle for survival, revealing it instead as a vibrant, intellectual, and deeply cultured way of life. The story of the Tuareg is a powerful testament to the fact that knowledge, when cherished and protected, can endure even the most adversarial of conditions, waiting patiently in the sand for a time when it can once again be read and understood. While the Tuareg safeguarded their wisdom in hidden desert scrolls, the Bedouin peoples of the Arabian Peninsula crafted a different kind of fortress for their knowledge, one built not from leather or stone, but from the human voice and the boundless sky above. In the vast, open deserts where a single misplaced step could mean disaster, their survival depended on an encyclopedic understanding of genealogy to navigate complex tribal alliances, poetry to uphold social norms and history, and perhaps most critically, an intimate mastery of the stars to guide them across a landscape with no roads or landmarks. They developed one of history's most sophisticated and enduring systems of oral archiving, where the entire cosmos became a reference library and every elder was a living, breathing book. This was not a casual tradition of storytelling. It was a rigorous, disciplined intellectual practice. Designated individuals within the tribe, known as Rawis for poets and Munajims for those specializing in astronomy, underwent decades of training to become living repositories. A single Rawi could hold in his mind genealogies that stretched back dozens of generations, essential for resolving disputes over water rights or marital alliances. He could recite thousands of lines of poetry that encoded everything from the history of famous battles to the legal precedents for settling conflicts. This knowledge was far too vital to be left to chance. It was preserved through a powerful combination of cultural reverence and sophisticated mnemonic engineering. The complex rhythmic meter and rhyme scheme of classical Arabic poetry acted as a cognitive scaffold, locking vast amounts of information into a precise and unforgettable structure. To forget a line would break the rhythm, creating a jarring error that was immediately obvious to both the reciter and the audience, ensuring an incredible degree of accuracy across centuries of transmission. The most breathtaking application of this oral technology was in the science of celestial navigation, known as Anwa. The Bedouin did not merely look at the stars, they engaged in a continuous, generations-long dialogue with them. They divided the sky into mansions, tracking the heliacal rising and setting of specific star groups to mark the seasons with exquisite precision. The pre-dawn appearance of the Pleiades cluster, which they called Tuareg, signaled the end of the scorching summer heat and the arrival of the milder, rainy season, the time to move herds to new pastures. This critical piece of meteorological data was not stored in an almanac. It was woven into a poem. A navigator would recite verses that linked the position of Tuareg to the coming weather, turning a beautiful piece of poetry into a practical, life-saving instruction manual. The stars themselves became characters in an epic drama that played out across the night sky, their movements telling the story of the year and dictating the rhythm of life on the desert. This knowledge was performed and reinforced in the most natural of settings, the nightly gathering around the campfire, or majlis. Here, away from the distractions of the day, the elders and specialists would share stories, debate points of history, and recite poetry for the entire community. Young children absorbed the rhythms and stories almost through osmosis, while older youths were given specific passages to memorize, their progress carefully monitored by their elders. This transformed education from a formal chore into a cherished social event, a time of bonding and cultural reinforcement. The information was not just memorized, it was felt, debated, and internalized, making it deeply resilient. Even with the spread of Islam and the widespread adoption of written Arabic for religious and administrative texts, these oral traditions stubbornly persisted. The spoken word performed within the community retained an authority and living presence that a static written text could not replicate. The Bedouin approach demonstrates the ultimate integration of knowledge and identity. Their understanding of the world was not something they possessed, but something they lived and breathed, a seamless tapestry of poetry, stars, and sand that defined who they were. This incredible fluency of memory presents a fascinating counterpoint to the great knowledge systems of the settled world. Yet for all their brilliance, the nomadic approach to knowledge was not without its own distinct vulnerabilities. The very fluidity that made oral traditions so resilient also made them susceptible to a slow, subtle drift over generations. A meticulously memorized epic poem might gain a new heroic flourish in one telling, or a crucial medicinal ingredient might be forgotten in another, leading to variations that, over centuries, could alter the original meaning. This stood in stark contrast to the fixed, unchanging nature of a written manuscript carefully copied by a scribe in Baghdad's House of Wisdom. In those great settled libraries, a scholar could be confident that the astronomical tables they were consulting were identical to those written 200 years prior, allowing for a precise, cumulative building of understanding. The nomadic system traded this kind of pinpoint accuracy for dynamic adaptability, a calculated risk that prioritized cultural survival over perfect preservation. This fundamental difference highlights the core trade-off between these two worlds of knowledge. Settled societies, with their permanent institutions and vast resources, were masters of accumulation and detail. They could amass enormous collections, cross-reference countless texts, and produce encyclopedic works of philosophy, medicine, and law. Their strength was in depth and volume. Nomadic societies, constrained by what they could carry, became masters of distillation and essence. They prioritized the most vital, life-sustaining information, the law that prevented conflict, the star law that ensured safe passage, the history that bound the community together. Their strength was in relevance and resilience. One system was a deep, still lake holding an immense volume of water. The other was a network of underground springs, each one smaller, but far harder to poison or dry up entirely. Crucially, these were not two separate, isolated streams of human thought. They constantly flowed into one another, creating a rich intellectual exchange. The Mongol conquests provide the most powerful example of this synthesis. After sacking cities and toppling empires, the Mongol Khans did not simply destroy the sedentary knowledge they encountered. They actively absorbed and patronized it. They brought Persian astronomers, Chinese engineers, and Byzantine scholars to their courts, creating a melting pot of ideas that was then disseminated back out across the trade routes of their empire. A medical text written in Arabic might be translated into Mongolian and carried by a horseman to a distant corner of the steppe, where its knowledge would be incorporated into a shaman's oral repertoire. In this way, the robust, distributed network of nomadic knowledge became a conduit for the specialized, deep learning of the settled world, proving that the most powerful intellectual systems are often those that can bridge both approaches, valuing both the permanent record and the living word. Yet for all their vital role, the contributions of these women were often rendered invisible in the broader historical narrative, a record frequently written by outside observers or male chroniclers who focused on the more public, male-dominated spheres of warfare, politics, and formal diplomacy. The quiet, steady work of a grandmother teaching a girl the properties of a healing herb, or a mother reciting a lineage poem while weaving, was seen as domestic and ordinary, rather than recognized as the intellectual labor that it truly was. This oversight creates a significant gap in our understanding, forcing us to look beyond traditional historical sources and listen instead to the living traditions, the patterns in textiles, and the oral testimonies that have been passed down through matrilineal lines. Correcting this narrative does more than just add women to the story. It fundamentally changes our understanding of how these knowledge ecosystems functioned. It reveals a sophisticated division of intellectual labor where the practical, life-sustaining wisdom essential for daily survival and cultural coherence was often curated and protected by women. This ensured a holistic preservation of knowledge, where the epic tales of heroes sung by men existed alongside the intimate, practical wisdom of the household, with both being equally critical for the tribe's identity and resilience. This hidden labor, so often taken for granted, was the very thread that held the fabric of nomadic culture together across the centuries, a silent, powerful force of continuity operating from the heart of the home. This sacred dimension transformed the act of preserving knowledge from a simple practical task into a profound spiritual obligation. For many nomadic cultures, wisdom was not merely a human invention. It was a divine gift, a sacred trust passed down from ancestors or revealed by the gods themselves. This belief infused every aspect of their intellectual life with a deep sense of reverence and moral responsibility. A shaman among the Siberian reindeer herders, for instance, did not simply memorize medicinal plant lore. He received it through visions during trance states, often induced by rhythmic drumming or ritualistic dance. These revelations were considered direct communications from the spirit world, and as such they were treated with the utmost care. The songs that contained this knowledge were not mere mnemonics. They were sacred hymns, their precise melodies and rhythms believed to hold the very power of the healing plants they described. To alter a single word or note was not just an error, it was a potential desecration, an act that could render the knowledge powerless or even invite misfortune. This spiritual framework created a powerful incentive for flawless transmission, ensuring that the most vital information was preserved with incredible accuracy across countless generations. We see this sacred relationship with knowledge vividly within Islamic nomadic groups as well. For the Bedouin of Arabia and the Berber tribes of North Africa, the Quran was not just a religious text, it was the literal word of God, and its preservation was a paramount duty. This led to the development of astonishing feats of memorization, with individuals known as Hafiz committing the entire text to memory. But the sacredness of this knowledge also extended to its physical protection. Verses from the Quran or sayings of the Prophet known as hadiths were often meticulously copied onto small pieces of parchment or vellum. These fragments were then carefully folded and sealed within leather amulets known as hers or tawi, which were worn on the body for protection and blessing. In times of extreme danger, such as an impending raid or a natural disaster, these precious textual amulets, along with other important documents, might be placed in a sealed container and buried in a known, sacred location, perhaps near the grave of a revered saint or in a cave considered to be blessed. This act was both practical and deeply spiritual, a way of entrusting divine knowledge back to the earth for safekeeping until it could be safely recovered. This intertwining of the spiritual and the practical provided a powerful methodology for safeguarding wisdom. Access to the most sacred knowledge was almost always restricted to initiates who had undergone rigorous training and purification rituals. A young Tuareg woman learning the Tifinagh script from her mother was not just learning letters, she was being initiated into a sacred lineage of literacy. A Mongol shaman's apprentice would spend years not only memorizing songs and rituals, but also learning the proper spiritual conduct required to handle such powerful information. This exclusivity acted as a quality control mechanism, ensuring that knowledge was only used by those who understood its profound significance and the ethical responsibilities that came with it. It prevented the dilution or misuse of powerful information, whether it was a secret desert route that could lead a rival tribe to your water source or a spiritual chant that was believed to influence the weather. The knowledge itself became a kind of sacred geography, a map of both the physical and the spiritual world, and its careful preservation was the duty that bound the community to its past and secured its future. This deep respect for wisdom as a living, spiritual force ensured that it was treated not as a disposable tool, but as the very core of cultural identity and resilience. But what exactly were the physical tools that made this possible? Nomadic ingenuity truly shines in the materials they selected, each one a masterclass in adapting to their environment and lifestyle. Forget heavy clay tablets or bulky parchment codices. Their entire approach was governed by the principles of portability, durability, and multifunctionality. A nomad's toolkit for knowledge was a curated collection of the everyday, transformed into something extraordinary. Animal skins, meticulously scraped and treated with natural oils, became supple, weather-resistant scrolls that could be rolled tightly and carried in a saddlebag. Bones and antlers readily available from hunts were carved with notches and symbols to act as calendars, tally counts for herds, or even genealogical records. A single carved rib bone could tell the story of a family's livestock across generations. And for messages or symbols meant to last for centuries, they turned to the most permanent canvas of all, stone. Inscriptions on cliff faces, burial markers, or standing stones served as immutable public records, their messages etched into the landscape itself for all who passed by to see and interpret. Beyond these physical objects, the most sophisticated tool was, of course, the human mind itself. Many of these cultures employed a powerful mental technique known as the memory palace, a method of associating complex information with specific physical locations in a familiar landscape. A shaman might mentally place the steps of a healing ritual at various points along a frequently traveled migration route, the invocation of a spirit at a distinctive twisted tree, the list of medicinal herbs at a particular rock formation, and the final prayer at a sacred spring. To recall the entire ritual, he would simply take a mental walk through this palace, retrieving each piece of information from its designated spot. This turned the vast, open world around them into a structured, internal library, with every mountain, river, and landmark acting as a mental bookshelf. It was a way of anchoring abstract knowledge to the concrete physical reality they navigated every single day. The beauty of these tools often lay in their layered purposes. A single object could be practical, sacred, and a knowledge repository all at once. Take the Tibetan prayer wheel, a common sight among nomadic groups in the Himalayas. On its surface, it's a handheld cylinder that can be spun by a handle, but inside it is not empty. It is filled with tightly rolled scrolls of paper or parchment, each one inscribed with thousands of repetitions of sacred mantras. Every rotation of the wheel is believed to release the power of those prayers into the world, making it a potent spiritual tool. Yet, it also physically contains written knowledge, protecting the fragile manuscripts within a durable wooden or metal shell, allowing the devotee to literally carry a library of sacred texts with them on their journeys. It is faith, philosophy, and preservation engineered into one perfectly portable device. Similarly, the wampum belts crafted by various Native American nations in the northeastern woodlands are a stunning example of multi-sensory recording. These belts, woven from carefully shaped and polished purple and white quahog shell beads, were far more than jewelry. The patterns, colors, and arrangements of the beads served as a mnemonic device for recounting history, confirming treaties, and recording laws. A trained speaker would hold the belt and use the visual patterns to guide the recitation of a complex agreement, with each bead and symbol triggering the memory of a specific clause or promise. The belt itself was the physical record, but its true meaning was unlocked only through the oral performance it catalyzed. It was a tactile, visual, and auditory information system, perfectly suited to a diplomatic culture that valued both ceremony and precise memory. The choice of material was never arbitrary. It was deeply symbolic, creating a powerful link between the physical object and the intellectual weight it carried. Using the skin of a revered animal for a scroll might imbue the text with that creature's perceived wisdom or strength. Inscribing a law onto a stone lifted from a sacred mountain would tie that law to the eternal, unyielding authority of the land itself. This symbolism ensured that the knowledge was treated with respect and that its importance was communicated not just through its content, but through the very medium chosen to preserve it. This incredible resourcefulness, born from the constraint of having to carry everything they owned, demonstrates a universal truth. Necessity is not just the mother of invention, but the architect of profound creativity. It shows us that when you cannot build a library of brick and mortar, you learn to build it from memory, from landscape, and from the humble, extraordinary materials already at hand. Imagine the immense task of organizing an entire civilization's knowledge without a single filing cabinet, index card, or search bar. For nomadic cultures, this wasn't a theoretical challenge, it was a daily reality. They couldn't simply walk over to a labeled shelf to find a specific medicinal recipe or a crucial point of tribal law. Instead, they engineered brilliant, intuitive systems of organization, turning the natural world and the human mind into a living, breathing card catalog. Their methods were built on a sophisticated understanding of how information is best stored, retrieved, and taught, proving that organization is not about technology, but about ingenuity. One of the most common and effective strategies was thematic categorization, deeply intertwined with daily life and survival needs. A healer or shaman wouldn't just memorize a random list of plants, they would mentally file them according to their use. All the herbs for treating fevers would be grouped together in a specific song, its melody acting as a mental folder. Another song, with a completely different rhythm and tone, would be dedicated exclusively to plants that healed wounds or stopped bleeding. This meant that when a specific situation arose, the healer didn't need to sift through every piece of botanical knowledge they possessed. They simply accessed the correct playlist. Similarly, a chieftain or elder responsible for jurisprudence would organize complex tribal laws into easily remembered proverbs or short, pithy sayings. A dispute over water rights might be resolved by invoking one well-known proverb, while a conflict over inheritance would call upon another. This transformed a potentially cumbersome legal code into a streamlined, accessible, and highly functional system that everyone in the community could understand and reference. For the physical caches, those hidden libraries buried in the desert or sealed in mountain caves, a different kind of organization was required. Since these locations had to be kept secret from outsiders, they developed a sophisticated system of symbolic markers, a hidden code known only to trusted members of the community. A traveler searching for a hidden cache wouldn't find a sign that said, "Library here." Instead, they would be looking for a seemingly natural arrangement of stones. 3 stones stacked in a very specific, unstable-looking way on top of a larger boulder might indicate that a cave entrance was directly below. A particular pattern of scratches on a tree trunk, a pattern that looked like animal marks to the untrained eye, could signal that one should dig at the base of that tree. These symbols acted as a primitive but highly effective indexing system, allowing those in the know to navigate the vast landscape and retrieve specific information with remarkable efficiency. The landscape itself became a classified filing system. This organizational genius extended into the very structure of their educational practices. Knowledge wasn't taught as a random assortment of facts. It was passed down in carefully structured modules that mirrored its mental categorization. A young apprentice learning navigation wouldn't be overwhelmed with the entire night sky at once. Their training would be meticulously organized. They might first spend a season learning only the stars that appear in the east, along with the specific poems associated with them. Once that module was mastered, they would move on to the western stars, then the seasonal changes, and so on. This modular approach made the immense task of memorization manageable and ensured that information was deeply learned and logically interconnected. The structure of the teaching reinforced the structure of the knowledge itself, creating a robust and resilient system where every piece of information had its designated place, not just in the mind, but in the very rhythm of cultural life. This intricate, multi-layered approach to organization reveals a profound and sophisticated understanding of information management that allowed their most vital wisdom to remain perfectly functional, instantly accessible, and beautifully preserved against the relentless passage of time. This constant state of motion meant that knowledge could never afford to be static. It had to be as dynamic and responsive as the people who carried it. Imagine a family of herders following ancient migration routes across the steppe, only to find that a river has changed its course or a familiar mountain pass is now blocked by a landslide. The old songs and stories that once perfectly described the landscape would suddenly be out of date. So, what did they do? They didn't discard the old knowledge, they adapted it. The next time the epic poem was recited around the fire, the bard might seamlessly weave in a new verse about the river's new path, or a fresh description of an alternative route. The core of the story, the hero's journey, the moral lessons remained intact, but the practical, geographical details were updated to reflect the new reality. The knowledge evolved to ensure it remained a reliable guide for survival, not a fading relic of a world that no longer existed. This evolutionary process was supercharged by the very trade routes that connected these cultures to the wider world. A healer traveling with a caravan might encounter a plant she's never seen before in a distant market. she would learn from a local practitioner about its properties. Perhaps it was a powerful fever reducer or could ease a stomach ailment. She wouldn't just write this down and forget it. She would test it herself, observe its effects, and then incorporate this new remedy into her own repertoire of healing songs. But she wouldn't simply add it as a separate foreign idea. To make it stick, to make it truly part of her own culture's knowledge, she would find a way to fit it into the existing structure. She might create a new stanza in an old healing chant, comparing this new plant to a familiar local herb, using a similar rhythmic pattern to make it easy to remember. The new knowledge was absorbed, contextualized, and made native, enriching the tradition without breaking its fundamental form. This created a beautiful, living tapestry of wisdom, but it also introduced an inherent tension. The very strength of this system, its fluidity, was also its greatest vulnerability. With each retelling, with each new adaptation, there was a risk that the original meaning could be slowly, almost imperceptibly, altered. A detail might be exaggerated for dramatic effect during a performance. A crucial step in a complex ritual might be forgotten by one apprentice and then missed from future transmissions. Over generations, these tiny variations could accumulate, like a message whispered around a circle, until the current version might only vaguely resemble the original. This was the central paradox of their intellectual world. Knowledge had to change to stay alive, but in changing, it risked losing its essential truth. This stands in such stark contrast to the knowledge systems of the great settled libraries. In Baghdad or Constantinople, a scribe's duty was to copy a text with absolute fidelity. Their goal was to eliminate change, to freeze knowledge in time, ensuring that a mathematical theorem or a historical account written 500 years prior would be read exactly the same way 500 years later. The nomadic approach was the opposite. It embraced time. It saw knowledge as a river, not a statue constantly flowing, shifting its banks, fed by new tributaries, but always remaining the same river. Theirs was a philosophy that understood that for knowledge to have real power, it had to speak to the present moment. It had to be relevant to the current migration, the current illness, the current social challenge. This required a delicate and continuous dance between the deep, anchoring weight of tradition and the nimble, adaptive need for innovation. They were master editors of their own existence, constantly curating the library of their culture, deciding what to keep pristine, what to update, and what to let fade away, all in the relentless pursuit of a wisdom that was both timeless and immediately useful. This incredible balancing act, however, was perpetually threatened by the very real and human risk of things being lost in translation. Yet for all their remarkable ingenuity, these systems of memory and hidden caches existed on a knife's edge, perpetually vulnerable to the very chaos they were designed to withstand. The human mind, though a formidable instrument, is tragically mortal. The sudden outbreak of disease or the violence of conflict could swiftly erase generations of carefully curated wisdom in a matter of days. Imagine a revered elder, the sole keeper of a tribe's complete genealogical record or a unique set of medicinal recipes, succumbing to a fever. Without a fully trained apprentice ready to receive this knowledge, that entire branch of understanding would vanish forever, leaving a silent void where there was once a living library. This demographic fragility was an ever-present shadow, a constant race against time to ensure the chain of transmission remained unbroken. The oral tradition itself, while dynamic and adaptable, carried within it the seeds of its own distortion. Unlike a text fixed upon a page, a story passed from one generation to the next is a living thing, shaped by the teller's personality, the audience's reaction, and the context of the telling. A bard might, over years of performance, subtly embellish a heroic deed to win greater applause from a crowd. A crucial detail in a navigation poem might be misremembered during a time of famine or stress, and that altered version then becomes the new standard for the next apprentice. This slow, almost imperceptible process of mutation, known as drift, could over centuries transform a historical account into legend, or a precise astronomical observation into a vague myth. The very strength of the system, its fluidity, was also its greatest weakness, making it nearly impossible to preserve a perfect, unaltered record across hundreds of years. The physical caches, those hidden libraries buried in the earth, faced their own arsenal of threats. No matter how cleverly a container was sealed or how perfectly a cave was chosen, the elements are relentless. A sudden flood could saturate a leather scroll bundle, causing the inks to bleed and the animal skin to rot into an indecipherable mass within a single season. A shift in the soil's acidity could slowly eat away at a metal box, exposing its precious contents to dampness and decay. And then there was the human threat, looting. The Scythian burial mounds, or kurgans, which were intended as eternal resting places filled with golden artifacts that encoded their entire worldview, became irresistible targets for grave robbers across the millennia. These looters, seeking only precious metal, would melt down intricate pectorals and finely worked ceremonial vessels, utterly indifferent to the cultural narratives and historical data they were destroying in the process. Each plundered kurgan represented not just a theft of wealth, but the irreversible erasure of a chapter from human history. These vulnerabilities force us to confront a humbling reality, that our understanding of these nomadic cultures is inevitably fragmented, pieced together from the fragments that somehow, against all odds, survived the relentless winnowing of time. The knowledge we have recovered is likely just a fraction of what once existed, the echoes of a much richer and more complex intellectual symphony. Recognizing these limitations does not diminish their achievements. On the contrary, it magnifies them. It underscores the monumental effort and profound dedication required to preserve anything at all within such a precarious existence. Every epic poem that reached us, every hidden scroll that was recovered intact, stands as a testament to a fierce and enduring determination to ensure that their story, their wisdom, and their identity would not be entirely silenced by the desert winds or the forgetfulness of generations. This acknowledgement of loss makes the legacy that did endure all the more precious and impactful. For centuries, the vast intellectual legacy of nomadic societies remained just beneath the surface, hidden in the sands of the Sahara, frozen in the permafrost of Mongolia, and preserved in the fading memories of elders. Today, a remarkable renaissance is underway, a collaborative effort between modern science and living tradition to rediscover and revitalize these once secret knowledge systems. Archaeologists are no longer just digging for treasure, they are digging for wisdom, employing sophisticated tools like ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR scanning to locate buried caches without disturbing them. These non-invasive technologies allow researchers to pinpoint the potential locations of hidden libraries, a subtle anomaly in the soil that might be a sealed ceramic jar, or a void in a cliff face that could be a forgotten cave, guiding careful, respectful excavation that preserves the context and integrity of every find. In the deserts of North Africa, this has led to the incredible recovery of Tuareg leather scrolls, their Tifinagh script still legible, waiting in sealed pots for hundreds of years to tell their stories of trade routes, poetry, and stellar navigation. Simultaneously, anthropologists and linguists are engaged in a race against time, working alongside communities to document the oral archives that are the last living links to this knowledge. They sit with elders, recording their recitations of epic poems, their intricate genealogies, and their precise descriptions of medicinal plants. This is not a simple act of recording. it is a process of salvaging a vast and complex intellectual universe before it vanishes. A single elder's passing can represent the loss of an entire library of information that exists nowhere else. These recorded narratives are then painstakingly cross-referenced with physical artifacts and historical records, creating a multidimensional understanding that text alone could never provide. This work is fundamentally changing the historical narrative, proving that these societies possessed sophisticated, organized systems of science, law, and philosophy that were simply expressed in a different medium. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of this revival is the empowerment of descendant communities. For too long, the history of nomadic peoples was written by outsiders, often portraying them as primitive or reactionary. Now, the recovery of their own intellectual heritage allows them to reclaim their narrative and assert their place in human history. Initiatives to digitize these findings are crucial to this process. High-resolution photographs of fragile scrolls, 3D scans of artifacts, and digital databases of oral histories are making this knowledge accessible to community members, scholars, and a global audience. A young Tuareg person in Mali can now access a digital archive of their ancestors' poetry and scripts online, connecting with a cultural identity that colonialism and modernization had often suppressed. This is not just about preserving the past, it is about using that past to build a stronger future, providing a foundation of cultural pride and continuity for new generations. This global recognition of nomadic intellectual traditions forces a profound re-evaluation of what we consider literacy and preservation. Our modern world often equates knowledge with the written word, and particularly with printed text. The achievements of these cultures challenge that narrow definition, demonstrating that complex, accurate, and enduring knowledge can be, and was successfully preserved through performance, art, and mnemonics. It asks us to expand our understanding of a library to include a bard's memory, a shaman's song, and the symbolic language of a woven belt. The legacy of the nomads is a testament to human adaptability and creativity, showing that the drive to know, to remember, and to teach will find a way with or without paper. This reassessment of historical value beautifully sets the stage for seeing the unexpected connections between these ancient systems and the way we manage information in our own digital world. It's almost uncanny how the strategies of ancient nomads are finding a second life in our modern digital landscape. The core challenges they faced: how to store information securely, share it widely but selectively, and ensure it survives disaster, are the very same problems our computer scientists and engineers are solving today. The solutions they engineered through sheer necessity are now being reinvented with silicon and code, proving that the most enduring principles of information management are truly timeless. Consider the very backbone of our modern internet, cloud storage. We think of this as a revolutionary concept, but in essence, it's a digital recreation of the nomadic principle of distributed caching. Just as a Mongol tribe would never store their only copy of an imperial decree in a single, vulnerable location, we no longer keep our precious data on one fragile hard drive. Instead, we trust services to scatter copies of our photos, documents, and files across multiple servers in data centers around the globe. This system ensures that if one server farm is hit by a flood, a fire, or a systemic failure, the information is not lost. It can be instantly retrieved from another location in the network. This is the exact same risk management philosophy that led a Tuareg family to bury duplicate scrolls in separate oases. Both systems understand that true security doesn't come from building a single, impenetrable fortress, but from creating a resilient, redundant network where the loss of any one node is not a catastrophe. This principle of decentralization goes even deeper, reaching the cutting edge of technology with blockchain. At its heart, a blockchain is a distributed ledger, a record of transactions that isn't controlled by any central authority like a bank or government. Instead, identical copies of this ledger are maintained and updated simultaneously across a vast, sprawling network of computers. For a transaction to be validated, a consensus must be reached across this network, making the record incredibly secure and nearly impossible to corrupt or erase. This is a stunning digital parallel to how nomadic societies managed their collective knowledge. There was no central library of Alexandria for the Bedouins. Their historical record existed as a consensus of memories held by respected elders and poets across different tribes. The integrity of their history was maintained through this distributed, communal verification process, making their knowledge system, in a sense, one of the earliest forms of consensus-based ledger technology. Even the ancient art of encryption has its direct counterpart in these old practices. When we send a private message using an encrypted app, we are essentially doing what a Tuareg scribe did when she encoded a secret trade route into a complex geometric pattern on a leather scroll. In both cases, the information is hidden in plain sight, accessible only to those who possess the key, whether that key is a digital password or the cultural knowledge to interpret the symbolic language. The intent is identical: to share vital information freely within a trusted circle, while making it utterly meaningless to any outside observer who might intercept it. This need for selective accessibility, balancing open exchange with tight security, is a challenge that connects a camel caravan on the Silk Road to a fiber optic cable under the ocean. And what of the modern explosion of podcasting, audiobooks, and digital storytelling? This is the grand revival of the oral tradition. For centuries, the primary way humans experienced stories and absorbed information was through the spoken word. We are now, in many ways, returning to that norm. A compelling podcast host, much like a Greit or a Mongolian bard, uses tone, pace, and emotion to make complex information engaging and memorable. We listen while we commute, exercise, or work, seamlessly integrating knowledge acquisition into the flow of our daily lives, just as nomads wove their lessons into the rituals of the campfire. This shift back to audio acknowledges a fundamental truth that nomadic cultures understood intimately. Information conveyed through the human voice carries nuance, context, and a power to connect that pure text often lacks. These striking parallels are more than just historical curiosities. They offer us valuable lessons. In an age of information overload and anxiety about digital permanence, the nomadic approach provides a model of mindful curation. They didn't try to preserve everything. They prioritized what was truly essential for survival and cultural continuity. They understood that sometimes the most secure system isn't the most complex, but the most distributed. And they proved that knowledge is most alive when it is performed, shared, and adapted within a community, not just locked away in a static vault. Their wisdom reminds us that as we hurtle into the future, we shouldn't just be asking what new technology can do, but what we truly need it to do. The answers, it seems, have been with us all along, carried on the wind across countless generations and endless miles. What if the most innovative educational tools we've been searching for aren't found in the latest app or gadget, but are instead buried in the ancient practices of nomadic cultures? Our modern classrooms, often focused on standardized testing and passive information consumption, could learn a profound lesson from the way knowledge was woven into the very fabric of nomadic life. These societies understood that for information to stick, it couldn't just be heard. It had to be experienced, repeated, and made deeply relevant to survival and identity. This approach moves beyond rote memorization to a form of learning that is dynamic, resilient, and deeply engaging, challenging us to rethink the very architecture of education today. Consider the power of oral repetition and storytelling, the bedrock of nomadic knowledge transmission. A Bedouin child didn't learn star navigation by staring at a static diagram in a textbook. They learned it by listening to a poem, its rhythm and rhyme perfectly crafted to lock the positions of constellations into memory. The story of the stars was told and retold around evening campfires, transforming a complex astronomical concept into an unforgettable narrative. We can bring this same power into our classrooms. Imagine teaching scientific processes or historical timelines not through bland lists, but through crafted stories and songs. A complex biological cycle, like photosynthesis, could be turned into a character-driven story where sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide are protagonists on an adventure. This method doesn't just make learning more enjoyable, it taps into the brain's natural affinity for narrative, creating neural pathways that are far more durable than those formed by cramming for a test. This leads directly to the incredible effectiveness of mnemonic devices, which nomadic cultures elevated to an art form. Their entire knowledge system was built on memory aids, from the rhythmic structure of epic poetry to the physical notches carved on a shepherd's staff. These weren't simple tricks, they were sophisticated cognitive tools designed for maximum recall under pressure. Modern education often overlooks this tool in favor of overwhelming students with sheer volume. But what if we designed lessons like a nomadic memory palace? A history lesson on ancient civilizations could be a physical treasure hunt, where students move through different stations in a room or even the schoolyard, each station representing a different empire with artifacts and clues to solve. The physical movement and spatial association would anchor the facts far more effectively than reading a chapter and answering questions. This approach makes the learner an active participant in the construction of their own knowledge, rather than a passive vessel. Furthermore, the nomadic model of hands-on, apprenticeship-based learning stands in stark contrast to our often abstract and theoretical curriculum. A young Mongol would learn the art of falconry not from a manual, but by accompanying a master, observing, assisting, and slowly taking on more responsibility. The knowledge was gained through doing, through making mistakes and receiving immediate feedback in a real-world context. Our system could integrate this through much earlier and more meaningful project-based learning. Instead of just learning physics equations, students could apprentice with a local engineer to design and build a simple bridge. Instead of just reading about ecology, they could work with a community group to restore a local wetland. This apprenticeship model fosters not only deeper understanding but also crucial soft skills like problem solving, patience, and collaboration, skills that are directly applicable to life beyond school. Perhaps one of the most vital lessons is the promotion of cultural inclusivity by teaching the history of these diverse knowledge systems. Our standard curriculum often presents a very narrow, Eurocentric view of history and innovation, glorifying the great libraries of Alexandria while completely ignoring the sophisticated oral and hidden libraries of the Tuareg or the Mongols. By integrating these narratives into our history, science, and literature classes, we accomplish two things. First, we validate the intellectual contributions of indigenous and nomadic cultures, showing students that wisdom and innovation are not the sole property of sedentary, Western civilizations. Second, we foster a much richer, more global perspective. A student learning about astronomy would gain a far deeper appreciation by studying both the written tables of Ptolemy and the oral star lore of the Bedouin, understanding that there are multiple, equally valid ways of comprehending the universe. Ultimately, these ancient practices serve as a crucial reminder that true education is not merely the accumulation of facts. It is the process of weaving information into lived experience, of connecting knowledge to identity, community, and the physical world. The nomadic approach shows us that the most resilient knowledge is that which is useful, beautiful, and shared. It challenges us to move away from rigid, industrialized classroom models and toward learning environments that are dynamic, experiential, and deeply human. By embracing these ancient lessons, we aren't looking backward. We are reclaiming a more holistic, engaging, and effective way of learning that prepares students not just to pass tests, but to navigate the complex and ever-changing world they will inherit. But as these incredible caches of knowledge are brought to light, a complex and deeply important question emerges, one that goes far beyond archaeology and into the heart of ethics and justice. When a sealed pot containing ancient Tuareg scrolls is unearthed by a foreign research team, or when a sacred song is recorded by an anthropologist, who does that knowledge truly belong to? This isn't a simple question of possession. It's a profound dilemma that pits global academic interest against the rights and wishes of the very communities who created and protected this wisdom for centuries, often at great cost. The debate over ownership is perhaps most visible in the world of museums, where artifacts from nomadic cultures are often displayed behind glass, physically separated from the living communities whose identity they represent. The argument for keeping them there often centers on preservation and access, that these institutions have the resources to protect fragile objects and can make them available for scholars and the public from around the world to study and appreciate. There's a genuine desire to share the magnificence of these cultures with a global audience, to weave their stories into the broader tapestry of human history. Yet, this perspective can often overlook a crucial truth. For descendant communities, these are not merely artifacts or historical data points. A carved ritual object is not just a sculpture, it is a sacred being, an ancestor. A leather scroll is not just a text, it is a legal document, a title to cultural identity, and a direct link to a past that was deliberately hidden for protection. Taking these items and placing them in a distant museum can feel less like preservation and more like a continuation of the very colonial forces that many of these knowledge systems were designed to resist. The case of the Tuareg manuscripts is a powerful illustration of this tension. These texts were hidden specifically to protect Tuareg autonomy from outside influence. To have them discovered, catalogued, and stored in a European or American university library without the community's central involvement in deciding their fate can be experienced as a profound violation of that original act of safeguarding. It risks repeating a historical pattern where the knowledge of indigenous and nomadic peoples is extracted, interpreted through an external lens, and repackaged for external consumption, all while the originating communities themselves see little benefit and retain little control. This is where the modern concept of ethical preservation becomes paramount, moving beyond simple discovery to a model of collaboration and repatriation. Ethical preservation means that the first people consulted when a hidden library is found are not just archaeologists and linguists, but the elders and knowledge keepers of the community from which it originated. It means that these communities must lead the process of interpretation, because only they hold the cultural context to fully understand the nuances, the symbols, and the sacred meanings embedded within. A Western scholar might accurately translate the words of a Tifinagh poem, but a Tuareg elder understands the emotion, the history, and the land it describes. This collaborative approach ensures that knowledge is not merely taken, but is shared on terms that honor its original intent. In many cases, this will lead to repatriation, the physical return of objects to their homeland. But it can also lead to creative, shared stewardship. Perhaps the physical scrolls remain in a climate-controlled facility for their protection, but digital copies and all research rights are controlled by a cultural center within the community. Maybe a museum exhibit is co-curated, with the narrative told directly by community members, ensuring their voice is the primary one the audience hears. This honors the original spirit of these nomadic knowledge systems, which was never about hoarding wisdom for its own sake, but about safeguarding it for the community. It was knowledge meant to ensure survival, to maintain identity, and to guide future generations. To take that knowledge and commercialize it, or to use it for academic advancement without meaningful partnership and benefit sharing, is a modern form of exploitation that fundamentally misunderstands and disrespects the nomadic legacy. These ethical considerations are not just bureaucratic hurdles. They are essential to avoiding cultural appropriation and ensuring that the incredible intellectual achievements of nomadic societies are respected not as relics of a dead past, but as living, breathing traditions that continue to inform and sustain people's lives today. It is about shifting the power dynamic from one of extraction to one of relationship, recognizing that the true owners of rediscovered knowledge are, and always have been, the descendants of those who had the courage and wisdom to hide it in the first place. This nomadic perspective on knowledge offers a profound challenge to the very foundations of how many of us have been taught to see the world. For centuries, Western intellectual tradition has often leaned towards a model of knowledge as a kind of fixed edifice, a collection of discovered truths that, once written down in a book or proven in a lab, become permanent and unchanging possessions. We speak of mastering a subject as if knowledge were a territory to be conquered and ruled over, a destination we finally arrive at after a long journey of study. The nomadic worldview, refined over millennia of constant motion and adaptation, presents a radically different and deeply humbling alternative. Here, knowledge is not a fortress to be built and defended, but a river constantly flowing, shifting its course, fed by new tributaries, and forever changing the landscape through which it travels. It is not something you own and possess, but something you participate in, a dynamic relationship between the knower, the community, and the environment. This philosophy transforms wisdom from a static noun into an active verb. It is not a set of answers, but a living process of asking, sharing, and reinterpreting. A single star, for instance, was not just a fixed point of light for a Bedouin navigator. Its meaning changed with the seasons. Its appearance at dawn in the spring signaled one action for the herd, while its position at midnight in the autumn signaled something entirely different. The star's objective reality was constant, but its knowledge, its practical meaning and utility was entirely relational, dependent on its context within the celestial dance and the immediate needs of the community on the ground. This stands in stark contrast to a more rigid view where a star might be catalogued solely by its astronomical coordinates, its story fixed and finished. The nomadic way embraces the idea that the same piece of information can hold multiple, equally valid truths depending on the question being asked and the moment it is being asked. This inherent fluidity naturally fosters a powerful sense of intellectual humility, a quality often lost in more dogmatic systems. If your entire survival depends on accurately reading a landscape that is perpetually changing, where a trusted water source might dry up or a familiar migration route might be blocked by a landslide, you develop a mindset that is inherently skeptical of absolute, unchanging truth. You learn to hold your understanding lightly, to be ready to adapt when new information presents itself. This is not a sign of weakness or uncertainty, but of profound strength and pragmatic intelligence. It is the wisdom of understanding that the map is never the territory. The song about the river is not the river itself. This openness prevents knowledge from becoming brittle and dogmatic, allowing it to bend and evolve rather than shatter when confronted with a changing world. Furthermore, this view places the community, not the individual scholar, at the very center of the knowledge process. A solitary genius in an ivory tower is an alien concept in a world where information is the key to collective survival. Knowledge gains its validity and its durability through shared experience and consensus. An elder's recollection of a past drought is cross-referenced with other elders' memories. A new route proposed by a scout is debated and validated by the group before becoming part of the shared mental map. Knowledge is co-created and constantly verified through dialogue, making it a deeply social and collaborative endeavor. It exists in the space between people, in the stories told around fires, in the songs sung while working, and in the rituals performed together. This stands as a powerful reminder that our deepest understanding often emerges not from isolation, but from conversation and shared experience. Ultimately, this nomadic philosophy invites us to reframe our entire relationship with learning. It asks us to let go of the pressure to know it all, and instead, to embrace the lifelong excitement of being a perpetual apprentice to the world. It suggests that the goal is not to accumulate a hoard of facts, but to become more skillful and graceful navigators of an ever-changing reality. It values questions as much as answers, adaptability as much as accuracy, and wisdom as much as information. This perspective does not diminish the incredible achievements of written, settled knowledge systems. Rather, it complements them by offering a crucial counterweight, a reminder that true understanding is a journey without a final destination, a continuous, collective, and profoundly human conversation with the mystery of the world around us. From the sun-scorched dunes of the Sahara, we now journey north to the vast, wind-swept grasslands of the Eurasian steppe, home to one of history's most formidable and enigmatic nomadic cultures, the Scythians. These fierce, horseback warriors who dominated the region from around the 9th to the 1st century BCE present a fascinating paradox. They were described by the ancient Greeks as fearsome, blood-drinking barbarians, yet the legacy they left behind reveals a society of astonishing artistic sophistication and deep spiritual complexity. Unlike the Tuareg with their leather scrolls or the Bedouin with their oral poems, the Scythians built their libraries not from words but from gold. Their knowledge was entombed within elaborate burial mounds known as kurgans, and the treasures within these mounds served as a breathtaking, non-textual archive of their entire world. When we think of a library, we imagine rows of books, but the Scythian library was a collection of intricate artifacts, belts, combs, weapon hilts, pectorals, and vessels, all crafted from gold with mesmerizing skill. These were not mere decorations or displays of wealth. They were a complex symbolic language. A single gold plaque depicting a stag in motion is not just a beautiful image of an animal. To a Scythian, it might represent a specific deity, a story about the creation of the world, or a map of the constellations used for navigation. A scene of two griffins attacking a horse could encode a foundational myth about the struggle between chaos and order. Their entire belief system, their social hierarchy, their rituals, and their daily interactions with the animals of the steppe were all pressed into this gleaming metal. This was knowledge expressed through iconography, a visual code that could be read by anyone within the culture who understood its rich symbolism, making it a universally accessible record that transcended language barriers. Primary purpose of these golden archives was funerary. The Scythians believed in an elaborate afterlife, and a powerful chieftain or queen was buried with the objects they would need for the journey ahead. This included their weapons, their ceremonial horses, and often, tragically, members of their court, but crucially, they were also buried with these gold artifacts. This was more than just taking your valuables to the grave. It was about taking your identity and your knowledge. By sealing these object libraries within the kurgan, they were creating a permanent, indestructible record of who they were, what they believed, and how they lived, intended to last for eternity. The kurgan itself, a massive earthen mound rising from the flat steppe, became a landmark and a permanent part of the cultural landscape, a library with a single, magnificent book inside. The great tragedy of the Scythians, and the reason they remain so enigmatic, is that their meticulously designed system of preservation was ultimately no match for human greed. For centuries, these kurgans have been the prime targets of looters and grave robbers. The very material that made the artifacts so durable and valuable, gold, made them irresistible. Countless kurgans have been ransacked, their contents melted down into anonymous bullion, utterly erasing the cultural narratives they held. Each melted pectoral or sword hilt represents an entire chapter of human history lost forever, a silent story we can never recover. The knowledge contained within was so dependent on its physical form that destroying the object meant annihilating the information itself. What we understand today about the Scythians is pieced together from the fragments that survived the kurgans that were overlooked by looters and later excavated by archaeologists. Each discovery is a monumental event, offering a fleeting glimpse into this lost world. These findings reveal a people who were deeply spiritual, with a complex pantheon of gods and a strong shamanistic tradition. They were master horsemen and innovators in composite bow technology, and their society was highly structured with a powerful warrior elite. The golden stags, griffins, and scenes of combat are not random decorations. They are the coherent, artistic expression of a sophisticated civilization that chose to write its history in metal and earth rather than on paper. The Scythian example powerfully underscores the incredible diversity of nomadic knowledge systems. It proves that the absence of written text is not an absence of culture, history, or intellect. It is simply a different choice of medium, one that could be just as rich, complex, and intentional as any written archive, turning the entire steppe into a gallery of hidden knowledge waiting to be interpreted. So what can we ultimately learn from these incredible systems of memory, secrecy, and adaptation? The first and perhaps most profound takeaway is that knowledge is not inherently fragile. It only becomes so when we concentrate it in a single, vulnerable form. The grand libraries of the ancient world, for all their magnificence, were achingly vulnerable. A single fire, a single invasion, could erase centuries of accumulated wisdom in a matter of hours. The nomadic model presents a radical alternative: resilience through distribution. By scattering their knowledge across multiple minds, multiple songs, and multiple hidden caches spread over a vast geographical area, they engineered a system with no single point of failure. The loss of one elder, the destruction of one cave library, was a tragedy, but it was never a catastrophe. The wisdom lived on elsewhere, in other voices and other hiding places. This principle of decentralization, born from necessity on the open steppe, is now a cornerstone of our most advanced digital networks, from cloud storage to blockchain technology, proving that this ancient strategy is more relevant than ever in our own precarious digital age. This leads directly to the second crucial lesson: the irreplaceable role of community as the true guardian of knowledge. In our modern world, we often outsource memory to external devices, hard drives, servers, and phones. We treat knowledge as a commodity to be stored, rather than a living tradition to be nurtured. Nomadic cultures understood that the safest container for wisdom is not a building or a box, but a human being, and better yet, a network of human beings connected by shared responsibility. Knowledge was a communal project, a sacred trust that required constant practice, performance, and verification within the group. An elder's recitation was cross-checked by other elders. A young apprentice's memory was tested and corrected. This social framework created a robust system of checks and balances that ensured accuracy and prevented the corruption of essential information over time. It reminds us that the health of our collective knowledge depends not just on the technology we use to store it, but on the strength of the human relationships and shared purpose we build around it. Furthermore, their approach reveals the incredible power of a multimodal strategy. They never put all their eggs in one basket. A vital piece of information wasn't just written down, it was also sung, carved into an object, and symbolized on a piece of jewelry. The same star lore existed as a poem in a bard's memory, as notches on a navigator's staff, and as gold patterns on a ceremonial cup. This redundancy created a powerful safety net. If the oral tradition was disrupted, the artifact could serve as a reminder. If the artifact was lost, the landscape inscription could guide the way. This diversity of formats also made knowledge accessible to different kinds of learners and in different contexts, ensuring that it was woven into the very fabric of daily life, rather than being segregated into a specialized institution. It was a holistic ecosystem of information where each method supported and reinforced the others. Finally, the story of these hidden libraries imparts a critical ethical imperative for our own time: the need for respectful and collaborative engagement with cultural heritage. The rediscovery of these knowledge systems is not merely an academic exercise. It is an opportunity to rectify historical oversights and empower descendant communities. The very act of hiding knowledge was often a deliberate defense against colonialism, exploitation, and cultural erasure. As we now uncover these caches with ground-penetrating radar and record-fading oral histories, we must do so not as extractors but as partners. This means prioritizing the voices and leadership of indigenous and nomadic communities in interpreting, preserving, and sharing their own intellectual heritage. It means moving beyond the colonial model of placing artifacts in distant museums and instead working towards models of shared stewardship that honor the original intent of these knowledge systems to sustain and guide a living culture. This ethical approach ensures that we are not merely studying history, but actively participating in a more just and inclusive future for knowledge itself. These lessons, distilled from centuries of ingenuity, offer us not a quaint glimpse into the past, but a vital toolkit for navigating the information challenges of our own complex world. Reflecting on this incredible journey, it becomes profoundly clear that the underground libraries and oral archives of nomadic societies were far more than just historical curiosities. They represent nothing less than a monumental triumph of human intellect over circumstance. These were sophisticated, resilient systems engineered to ensure the very survival of knowledge against the most daunting odds: imaginable conquest, environmental catastrophe, and the relentless erosion of time itself. From the Mongols' hidden birch bark decrees scattered across the permafrost to the Bedouins' intricate star poems carried on the desert wind, every method we've explored underscores a universal and timeless human drive. It is a deep, innate need to learn from our surroundings, to share what we've discovered with our community, and to remember who we are, where we came from, and what we believe, ensuring that our story does not end with us. As we navigate our own modern era, characterized by a paralyzing digital deluge where information is infinite but wisdom often feels scarce, there is a profound and unexpected wisdom to be found in the nomadic approach. Their world forces us to reconsider our relationship with knowledge itself. In an age of cloud storage and instant access, their emphasis on radical selectivity is a powerful antidote to our hoarding impulse. They did not try to preserve everything. They preserved only what was truly essential for survival and cultural continuity. Their strategic use of secrecy challenges our modern cult of total transparency, reminding us that some knowledge gains its power and longevity from being protected and shared within a context of trust and meaning, rather than simply being blasted out into the void for anyone to scrape and misuse. And perhaps most importantly, their mastery of storytelling speaks to a fundamental truth we often forget. Data is not knowledge, and knowledge is not wisdom. Wisdom is born when information is wrapped in narrative, emotion, and shared experience, making it memorable, meaningful, and resilient enough to be carried forward. Let's carry this newfound appreciation with us, allowing it to reshape how we interact with the vast streams of information in our own lives. Perhaps we can all learn to become modern nomads of information, more mindful curators of what we consume and share, understanding that true knowledge isn't about possessing the most facts, but about weaving the most vital truths into the fabric of our lives and communities. We can choose to be more selective, to prioritize depth over breadth, and to value the human context of a story over the raw data point. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration into the past. I would love to hear which of these nomadic systems resonated most with you in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe for more adventures into the hidden corners